Hi, I'm Brian from Reload, Orange County Reloading Supply in Anaheim. I'm going to go over sizing dies. When you're brand new to reloading, you need to have a basic understanding that there are different types of die sets that you buy. Aside from the different brands, you have what is called a full-length sizing die, a neck sizing die, and then there is what is called small base sizing dies. And they have different applications. When you are firing ammunition in a gun, it puffs up to the dimensions of that chamber, commonly referred to as fire-formed casings. After they've been shot and they puffed up, we've got to knock out the old primer and then resize it back down so it can go back into that gun or, most any firearm of the same caliber. So the first and foremost die set that is typically used is going to be what's called the full-length die set. And what that does is you put some lubricant on a casing and you put it up inside of the die. When it goes to the top of the die, it squeezes down the neck, smaller than it needs to be. The shoulder of the bottleneck casing is bumped back, and then the body of the casing is squeezed in a few thousandths of an inch. And then the pin at the very bottom of the die is going to knock out the old primer. When the casing is withdrawn from the die, the expander ball at the bottom of that stem is going to open up the mouth of the casing to the appropriate diameter. Now, when you full-length size, it can go into pretty much any gun. However, in some guns where you have to have reliable feeding and lockup because you don't have, for example, the tremendous camming power of a bolt-action rifle, so if you have a slightly snug fit, you can crank that bolt down real hard and the gun will lock up and fire. Whereas on a semi-automatic, all you have is the mass, the weight of the bolt itself, and then the spring tension of the spring pushing the bolt forward as it strips a casing off the top of the magazine to push it into the chamber, and then the gun will lock up. If the gun doesn't lock up, it's not going to fire. Well, it's not supposed to fire if the gun isn't fully locked up. So unless you're going to be constantly on the forward assist, when we're loading for a semi-automatic, then we want to use a small base die set. So if you don't have dies yet and you just bought yourself a new, AR-10 or whatever, and you're going to go down to the store and you're going to buy yourself a die set, buy 308 small base die set. Now you know that it's going to lock up for you and that the casing is going to be sized such that it won't be too snug a fit where you're going to have problems getting the gun to lock up. Now, if you are doing long range work, and when I use the term long range, I'm talking about shots that are 1,000 yards and beyond, and you've got yourself casings that you have shot in that gun, they're fire formed. Now you want to use what is called the neck sizing die. Now there are a number of different types of neck sizing dies, but there's kind of the generic sizer that does not bump the shoulder back, nor is it going to bring the body of the casing down any. And the reason for that is you want it to be a good snug fit inside that chamber. So when it goes back in, the projectile is going to see the same position looking down the barrel. Otherwise, if you've got it sized down a few thousandths, it can move around a little bit. So if it is a snug fit and it sees the same position, that can help improve your accuracy. So aside from that, you also have steel dies and carbide dies. When you have a carbide die set, if you don't have lube on the casing and you put it up into a carbide die, it's not going to get stuck. If you do that with a steel die set and you don't put lube on it, it'll probably get stuck, and then I'm going to be selling you a stuck case remover. But remember, when you're using these lubes to lube your casings, that's like spray paint. This stuff separates. You got to shake it up before you use it. The wax works beautifully. Just don't goop up your casings, or when you put them inside the die, there's no room for the lube to move around, and then you're going to end up denting your casings. So you're going to use a full-length die for the most part when you're going to be loading for bolt-action rifles or single shots, by and large. If you're going to be making ammunition that's going to go only back into the rifle that it came out of, go ahead and use your neck sizing die. You're going to fire your casings a few times, but they do continue to stretch, so you are going to get to the point where you're going to have to go back to a full-length die to resize the casing. And if you're annealing after preferably every firing, but at least after every 2 or 3 firings, you're going to get far more case life out of your casings. If you got yourself a new Ruger Precision Rifle and 6.5 Creed, you got some of those Lapua casings, you probably want to make them last a little bit longer than you could otherwise, because they don't give those things away. But in that instance, when you're looking to get your dies, go ahead and get yourself like a premium die set. Brand doesn't really make any difference here. I just happen to grab Reading because that's what I happen to have closest to my hand behind me when I sat down to do this. In these, they're going to give you the full-length die, the neck sizing die, and a micrometer stem seating die. Nice to have. And now you've got it all in one fell swoop, and you're not making multiple trips back to the store to get your dies that are going to get you where you want to go with that kind of work. The other thing is when you are buying handgun dies, they typically would have a carbide ring at the very bottom of the die. Now again, I'm going to use Reading as an example just because I happen to have some right next to my hand. Let me show you that. You see that ring? Okay, that's a carbide ring. What that's going to do is allow you to size that casing, and if it didn't have any lube, it'll slide in and out of the die just fine. But having said that, manufacturers still recommend you put a little lube on your casings. So that carbide ring is going to stop short of the rim cut, maybe, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch or so, let's say. So if you've been shooting out of Glocks, and particularly if you're going to load a cast bullet that's a thou over, when you go seat that, you're going to end up with this like hourglass looking design. So for that, Lee's got a bulge buster, Reading's got one. You know, it straightens up the casing so you don't have that funny looking wave to your casing. And if it's not feeding, then you're probably going to need to do, well not probably, if it's not feeding, you're going to need to do something about it. If you don't have feeding problems, if there is no problem, there is no problem. It just looks kind of funny. But if you have steel dies, a steel die set, the sizer is going to be cut flat on the bottom, and because you don't have the ring, it'll get you much, much closer to the rim cut. See, on the bottom of that die, it's flat. So that is going to get you very close to the rim cut, and you're not going to have that bulge. So I've got a number of customers who have gone to the Reading steel dies for loading their handguns because they're shooting Glocks or whatever, that you're getting the bulge in those casings, and they don't want to deal with it, so they're just taking their time, they're doing it a little bit slower, they're using steel dies that are flat on the bottom that gets them close to the rim cut, and then you don't have the bulge thing to deal with. When you are buying dies for, like Dylan, okay, they know when you're buying die sets for like the 650 in either carbide or steel, that you're probably loading for a semi-automatic because you're going through a lot of ammo. That's why you're loading it on a progressive machine. Those things are going to size, that sizing die that is I'm talking about, will size those casings to an appropriate size so they will reliably feed in a semi-automatic. Now, older guns, M1 Garands, typically 30-06 full-length die set will actually size those just fine. A lot of those older guns with those military chambers, they're sufficiently generous to where you don't have to have a small base die set to make it work. A lot of them they've got in mind, you're out there in the mud and the dirt, you get crud in your action, the gun's still got to lock up and fire. So they kind of have that in mind, and typically full-length sizing will work for it. A lot of the modern ARs and whatnot have slightly snug chambers. You may need to go to a small base die set if the full-length die set is having you experience trouble getting the gun to lock up reliably. Some casings, they may size fine and the gun will work fine, and then you get a batch of casings, maybe a particular head stamp, and suddenly the gun's not locking up for you. So these are some considerations to keep in mind, and when you have this in mind, if you experience some trouble, it's like, okay, well, I've got full-length dies, and now I'll just go buy myself a small base sizer, and your problem goes away. There's more to this when we get into seating and crimping. Crimping is in and of itself a fairly lengthy discussion, so we'll hit that on another day. But I hope you have yourself a great day today. Happy trails.